in the earth-shot competition. Prime Minister was presented a bust of his by a very prominent surgeon, Dr. Nade Hakim. He is from London, and he had specially made a bust of the Prime Minister and wanted and requested the opportunity to present it, which he did. Again, High Commissioner was present on this occasion. The first event at COP26 was the official opening. I think we've all seen visuals of that very significant event. When the Prime Minister entered the COP26 venue, he was received by the UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson, who is the co-host of the event, along with the UN Secretary General, who also represents the UNFCCC. Prime Minister had a bilateral meeting with Prime Minister Johnson in the margins of the COP26 summit. It was a short meeting given the preoccupations of both the leaders, but nonetheless was comprehensive enough to cover a number of areas of interest. Prime Minister congratulated Prime Minister Boris Johnson for hosting a successful start of the COP26 summit despite pandemic restrictions. He also complimented Prime Minister Johnson for his personal leadership in championing global action for climate change mitigation and adaptation. He in fact mentioned to him that it has been 3 years that the Prime Minister himself has noticed Prime Minister Johnson invest himself personally on the issue of climate change and preparing for COP26. The Prime Minister reiterated India's commitment to closely work with the UK on climate finance, technology, innovations and adaptation, including green hydrogen, renewables, clean technology, and joint initiatives under the International Solar Alliance and the Coalition for Disaster Resilient Infrastructure. Both these international organizations have a very prominent UK involvement. The two Prime Ministers reviewed the roadmap outlining the 2030 priorities between India and the UK in areas like trade, economy, people-to-people ties, health, defense and security. It would also be recalled at the last summit, the two countries elevated our relationship to a comprehensive strategic partnership, and both sides expressed satisfaction at on the progress in delivering enhanced trade partnerships, including steps taken to commence towards the launch of FTA negotiations. I think both sides also felt that there should be some attention given to the earliest conclusion possible of this important trade-related partnership between our two countries. There was a discussion on regional and global issues, including Afghanistan, counterterrorism, Indo-Pacific, supply chain resilience and post-COVID global economic recovery. The Prime Minister reiterated his invitation to Prime Minister Johnson to visit India at an early opportunity. At the COP26 event, the Prime Minister attended a side event which is called Action and Solidarity, the Critical Decade. This was hosted by the UK Presidency of COP26. In his remarks, the Prime Minister spoke about the criticality of climate adaptation in development policy, the importance of traditional practices, and the need for global support for adaptation. The highlight of the day was the Prime Minister's national statement on COP26. You have all seen the actual coverage and the footage of the Prime Minister's statement. You would have also seen copies of his actual statement, and you would all agree that this is a seminal statement. It's a very significant contribution by India towards global actions on the climate change agenda, and it highlights not only the range and depth of climate actions taken by India, but also future goals that India has set for herself. If you allow, I'll just briefly recapitulate the main points that were made by the Prime Minister. He refers to it as the Panchamrit. And so here we are talking about by 2030, India's non-fossil energy capacity would be increased to 500 gigawatts. As you're aware, in Paris, there was talk of 175 gigawatts. Subsequently, we had unilaterally committed ourselves to creating 450 gigawatts of renewable energy by 2030. The Prime Minister spoke at the summit of 500 gigawatts of renewable energy by 2030. By all means, this is a very, very significant contribution, as I said, to the overall area of climate change and in meeting the goals of the summit very significantly, considering that India comprises 1/6 of humanity. You would be aware also that in Paris, our nationally determined contributions said that 40% of our installed electricity capacity would come from non-fossil fuel-based energy sources. The Prime Minister announced that today, he announced that by 2030, in fact, 50% would be met from renewable energy sources. So that's a significant announcement again. The Prime Minister also stated that India will reduce its projected carbon emissions by 1 billion tons from now until 2030. Again, one of the NDCs announced in Paris was that the emissions intensity of our economy would be reduced by between 33 and 35% by 2030. This is over 2005 levels. The Prime Minister today said that this would be reduced by 45%. So we've gone from 33 to 35 to 45%. Again, very, very significant. And for the first time, India has spoken about reaching net zero by the year 2070. So all of these are very significant, these 5 announcements the Prime Minister has made, and these I think would really, this would represent perhaps the most significant of announcements that have been made in the climate change domain in recent years. The Prime Minister, of course, highlighted the need for greater ambition on climate finance and technology. He felt that given the sort of commitments that were there, climate financing to the extent of $1 trillion would be required. He did say that while developing countries, and he spoke on behalf of the developing world when he said that there was pressure on the developing world to increase and enhance their commitments, there should be similar pressure on developed countries to enhance their financial contributions that would ensure that our goal of meeting our target of 1.5 degrees Celsius is met. And of course, he felt that it should also be both commitments in terms of the NDCs and commitments towards financing should be measurable and should be definable. The Prime Minister spoke about the fact that it was important to be able to reach sustainable consumption. He talked about what he called one word, that is life or lifestyle for environment, to make an environmentally conscious lifestyle choice covering diverse sectors. He felt there should be a global movement that should contribute towards lifestyle change that should greatly contribute towards meeting our climate change ambitions and actions. So it is not just in terms of reducing carbon intensity through steps that we are talking about. He's talking about a global movement, sort of a people's movement that would contribute to making that difference in harmony with nature, having a sustainable lifestyle, sustainable consumption, which the G20 also endorsed a short while ago at their summit. As I mentioned, the statement of the Prime Minister today was very significant, reiterates once again the commitment India has set towards combating climate change. It is imperative now that the developed world steps up and does its part. The Prime Minister has always stated that climate change for him was an article of faith, that India had always been more than fulfilling its own commitments in terms of climate change. Today, the Prime Minister not only spoke about the different steps that India has taken, but also made further contributions to our, I would say, overall approach towards the issue of climate change. I just want to mention that in the margins of of COP26, number of meetings other than the one with the Prime Minister of the UK could take place. And those were very useful interactions the Prime Minister had. You would all seen photographs of his meetings with the President of Sri Lanka, the Prime Minister of Nepal, and a host of other world leaders. Great opportunity to exchange notes, to talk about issues that are important for all of us after a long hiatus in which world leaders haven't been traveling, haven't been meeting each other. And we have one more day of COP26, but I think today's events in many senses have been very, very significant. Obviously, we'll take some time to really think about what these contributions are. Keep in mind that the Prime Minister pointed out a simple fact. He said the Indian Railways has committed to a net zero by 2030. More people travel in the Indian Railways in 1 year than the entire population of the world. So their contribution in terms of what has been committed by 2030 is very, very significant, and would in many senses lead to a 60 million tons reduction in emissions, not any small figure. And of course, he has talked about the fact that India today has the fourth largest renewable energy capacity in the world. Our non-fossil fuel energy use has gone up 250% in the last 7 years, and energy mix has reached 40%. So these are all very significant figures that the Prime Minister has spoken about. He's spoken about our energy efficiency movement, the use of LED bulbs as a movement which has led to a 40 million ton emissions reduction. So I'm just giving you some examples of what the Prime Minister spoke about. His speech is of course available, and I'm sure you will all look at it carefully. So I'll stop here. Arindam, thank you.
Thank you very much, sir, for taking us through the day's developments. We'll open the floor for a quick few questions. Please introduce yourself and the outlet that you represent. Many of the documents that Foreign Secretary alluded to, and during the day we've been trying to put it out on our social media as well as on our websites, so that will continue to happen. But with that, I saw a few hands, please. Okay, let me start with you, ma'am. All of you have questions.
Voice. I wanted to ask, you said that the Prime Minister has extended invitation to Mr. Johnson to visit India. Do you think there's a possibility he will be the chief guest during Republic Day, because it's an important year, 75th anniversary of Independence Day as well?
Will I take a few questions together?
I am Lavina Tandon from India Today and Ashtak. He's here tomorrow as well. Can you please tell us what are his program tomorrow and when does he leave? And does the team stay back for further negotiation in COP26? Thank you.
Gentlemen.
Hello. Kaya Burgess from the Times newspaper in London. All of the various commitments for the railways by 2030 and renewable share sound very encouraging, but I think a lot of people were struck by the fact that 2070 feels a very long way away, 20 years later than the 2050 that has been asked for by many countries. Why do you think it is that the date is quite... Why do you think the date is quite so late, 2070?
Please.
Just following up that earlier question, India had refused to commit itself to any date at all thus far, and certainly did not by that October 12 deadline that this conference had set or suggested. So between not setting a date and 2070, is that number a compromise? And is it a compromise under pressure?
Yeah, microphone.
Hi, Aditi from Press Trust of India. So if you could elaborate a little bit about the discussions around counter-terrorism, because some of the separatist activities from Khalisani groups in the UK have caused quite concern. And was that something the Prime Minister raised during his discussions? And just a second one on the UK-India Green initiative that was announced today. The Downing Street readout specifically talks about that. So if you could sort of touch on that a little bit. Thank you.
So perhaps we'll open the floor.
Let's start with Rupanjan's question about the visit of Prime Minister Boris Johnson to India. The Prime Minister invited him to visit India at an early opportunity. Prime Minister Boris Johnson happily accepted the invitation, said that he would plan his visit as soon as circumstances would allow. Lavina's question, I think, about the program. Tomorrow, again, a very busy day which begins fairly early. You have photo op of the leaders at 8:30 in the morning. You have a special session that would be the launch of the One World, One Sun.
No, this would the
Yes.
this would be the this would be the
The
small
senior
island,
Iris,
the
yes.
small island developing states.
So that's the initiative for resilient island states, which is essentially part of the Coalition for Disaster Resilient Infrastructure that would focus on building capacity, having pilot projects in, especially in small island developing states, that would also involve, in some senses, setting up norms and standards for resilient infrastructure. The Prime Minister has pointed out that in many cases lives are lost, but livelihoods and entire infrastructure, housing, everything that is to do with infrastructure is lost with cyclones, etc. Especially small island states and coastal areas are vulnerable to these ravages of climate change. And this is an effort to try and equip countries that are particularly vulnerable to these effects of climate change. And you will have the launch of the infrastructure for resilient island states. It's called IRIS. This would involve, it's a joint effort between India and the United Kingdom. So Prime Minister Modi and Prime Minister Boris Johnson will jointly launch this. You will also have the participation of Australia, which is also a partner in this effort. You will also have a number of leaders of small island states speaking on this occasion. You have the Prime Minister of Fiji, the Prime Minister of Jamaica, and the Prime Minister of Mauritius, and the UN Secretary General. So it's a very significant occasion. There are a number of bilaterals. You will have details of these bilaterals as we go along with them. The Prime Minister would be meeting a number of leaders of other countries. He'd also be meeting some individuals who are quite prominently associated with work relating to climate change and socio-economic development.
There's also now the Build Back Better one as well as the other side.
Right. In the afternoon, we have an event which is called Accelerating Clean Technology Innovation and Deployment. This is hosted by Prime Minister Johnson, and essentially Prime Minister Johnson and Prime Minister Modi will launch another initiative which is called One World, One Sun, One Grid. So Green Grid, which is the UK initiative, and One World, One Sun, One Grid, which is the initiative from the International Solar Alliance, which has been proposed by India. Both these would be jointly launched as a new initiative, and essentially seeks to promote connectivity through solar grids across the world. You will also have this launch will be with the participation of the President of the United States of America, President Joe Biden. You will have the participation of the Prince of the United Arab Emirates. You will have the Prime Minister of Bangladesh, Sheikh Hasina, who will be part of that initiative. You will have also the Prime Minister of Kenya, who will be, the President of Kenya, who will be also part of this effort. So this again, as you can see, is a significant initiative that comes from India and our other partners. Both the initiative, the infrastructure for resilient island states, as well as the launch of the One Sun, One World, One Grid, are very, very important global initiatives that is part of our effort to try and get more capacity building, more involvement and more support to other countries, especially developing countries across the world. So that sort of, and of course, yes, there is another initiative which is hosted by the US President on infrastructure development, Build Back Better, which is also, you can say, linked to the development of resilient infrastructure, and in some senses dovetails into what we are doing. The Prime Minister will participate in that initiative as well. So that is, in brief, the program for tomorrow. While the Prime Minister will be departing Glasgow at the conclusion of the high-level segment of COP26 tomorrow evening, you will have our negotiating team, which is here. We have our Minister of Environment who is here. We have the Secretary Environment who is here. We have a negotiating team that is in place, and they will continue to be participants in the conference until its conclusion on the 12th of November. There was a question on why 2070. Is it not too late? And also, was this something that came in under pressure? What is the requirement for this? I think, you know, in a certain sense, the Prime Minister has outlined, you know, very clearly India's own, let's say, our own progression that has led up to the net zero situation. And he has said that what is our own situation? We are essentially a developing country. Our focus is on bringing billions of our citizens out of poverty. We are working night and day to ease living, the standard of living in India for our citizens. We constitute 17% of the world's population, yet we contribute only 5% to global emissions, and yet we are contributing very readily to the entire overall issue of climate change because we believe in it. And as I said, Prime Minister said it's an article of faith for him. And if you see right at the end of his speech, the Prime Minister says that we are doing it for our future generations. Our future generations would be saved from, you know, a worse situation that could arise due to the current climate change problems, and that they would lead secure and happy lives. So it is in the interest of posterity that we are contributing, that we are making this effort, and that I think in many senses it is an important commitment to our own citizens, our own countrymen, our own future generations, and in doing so we are contributing to the rest of the world as a large country, as a developing country, but as a country that constitutes 17% of the world's population. Some have termed, in many senses, have termed the speech as realistic, responsible, ambitious. Net zero target year of 2070 means India will be among the shortest, if not the shortest gap between peak emissions year and net zero year for any major economy. In other words, while many of the economies that have announced a net zero have peaked much earlier, we have yet to peak. I mean, our peak is yet to come. We have yet to reach that level of industrial activity and development that would provide us with a future that we would be expected to for our citizens. The Prime Minister makes that case, and essentially, if you see, you know, the time lag between peaking and the time lag between net zero for many countries, clearly ours is possibly among the shortest. So this is also very significant. So our contribution should not be minimized. I think it should not be also, it should be seen in the right context that despite our preoccupations, we have actually talked of a net zero commitment. I can tell you that the leader of a country that talks about, that sets a target of 175 gigawatts, he sets his own target of 455 gigawatts, and now sets his target of 500 gigawatts, is not doing it. He's done it progressively, he's not doing it under any pressure. The only pressure on him is the pressure of humanity, the pressure of our own future, and I think that is very, very important. India is not going to be pressurized, will not be pressurized, and has never been pressurized in any way. It is important that we are doing it of our own volition. It is important that these are very carefully thought through decisions. And I think it is also based on science. It is a projection. If you see the projections about our own indices that were set in 2015, if you see the rate of our, let's say, achieving those commitments made in 2015, there is every reason to feel that at that rate of achievement and the levels at which our Prime Minister has pegged our commitments today, 2070 is something that would be doable, and it is a commitment that is made based, as I said, on science, but also based very specifically on the desire to contribute very significantly to the overall effort on climate change. And as I said, as you introspect, you will see that the announcements that he has made today are very, very significant for India and the rest of the world. And I want to leave you with that thought. Want to say something?
Not today. Nothing special.
Sorry, next round of questions.
No, sorry. There was a question on counterterrorism. You know, I think there was, as I said, the meeting was short, but it did allow short exchanges on concerns that both our countries have on increasing radicalism. Let us say, in many senses, the sort of extremism that we are seeing in certain fringe groups that seem to be speaking out, on issues that they have no legitimate right to do so, and without traction of any kind, but nonetheless is causing a certain level of disequilibrium and concern in both our countries. Prime Minister Johnson, I think, felt fully that some of these groups need to be reined in, and that clearly steps have to be taken to see how such activity, which under no means is democratic or constitutional, could be used to address these recent incidents. Green initiative, of course, I think any initiative that can help us reach our goals is important. But as I said, tomorrow we have two very important initiatives with the UK. We have the launch of as I said, of IRIS, which is the infrastructure for resilient island states, and we also have the launch of the Green Grids, One World, One Sun, One Grid. So both of these are actually complementary to the overall green initiative that you
Thank you,
mentioned.
sir. Any other questions? Okay, please.
Sam Gill, Dialogue Trust and Third Pole. My question is about, as you mentioned, India is a developing country. What are you going to be arguing for in terms of the solidarity offer that is required by particularly the least developed countries on climate finance, loss and damage, adaptations? Or what sort of demands is India going to be making in terms of those requirements? Thanks.
Microphone here, please.
Danish Khan from Times Now. It's related to the previous question, actually. Prime Minister spoke about adaptation, and it seems that a lot of other nations also touched upon the same concept. Barbados, for example, spoke very eloquently as well on the issue of adaptation. I will just request you to speak, or rather elaborate a bit on this approach to the problem of climate change. It also seems that India positioned itself as a country that could be a bridge between the developing countries and the developed world, the very fact that the Prime Minister came. What specific demands, or in which way India will also try to ensure that the wealthy nations pay what they had promised to help arrest the climate issue? Thank you.
I saw another hand. Yes, ma'am.
evening. My name is Ruhi Khan. I'm an independent journalist, but I've also recently written a book on the extradition cases from the UK to India. So my question is regarding the bilateral that the Prime Minister had with the PM Boris Johnson. Was the issue of extradition raised, in particular that of Vijay Mallya and Nirav Modi, and whether there has been any effort on India's side to talk to UK about it turning into a safe haven for these fugitives, and anything that could be done to get them back to India faster and with a more positive outcome? Thank you.
Okay, so I think that's the, okay, wrap it up with that.
Right. So let's just, I'm actually repeating myself, but the questions are in that direction. The Prime Minister Modi did speak very strongly on behalf of the developing countries when he talked about the need for measurable climate financing and technology transfers. If you saw that the G20 also had similar outcomes in which there was a sense that there should be more than just commitments for climate financing, it should be measurable. I think these aspects have been brought out today as well in the Prime Minister's statement. And clearly the G20 document, the outcome document provides a timeline by which the developed countries would fulfill their commitments in terms of climate financing. But what is most important is the Prime Minister pegged it to a certain figure. He talked about $1 trillion that are needed. So we're not talking about billions anymore. The requirements and the let's say situation that compels us to move towards stronger measures in terms of climate change in order to meet climate change actions and climate change adaptation mitigation actually needs more resources. We need to expend more to reach these goals, and the Prime Minister spoke about $1 trillion that are needed. He also said that while the developing countries, with India in the lead, because we have made commitments which have been probably more profound in many ways, have constantly agreed to raise the bar in terms of climate actions. The developed world also needs to raise the bar in terms of climate financing, and that these contributions should be measurable. In other words, there should be a way to be able to both monitor and to be able to assess those contributions. I saw that a number of other statements, including from the UN Secretary General, also were in that direction. That not only should climate finance be complementary to climate action, but that they should be defined and they should be actually monitored on a periodic basis. The issue of I think adaptation is again very much in the Prime Minister's statement. I also gave you certain examples of adaptation measures that India is taking. In fact, many of our national programs have actually been in the area of adaptation, whether it is in the area of Jal Shakti, which is drinking water supply, whether it's in the area of Namami Gange, which is cleaning the main river, which is the river Ganga, or it is in terms of the Swachh Bharat Abhiyan, which is a Clean India. All of these actually are adaptation measures, afforestation, revival of degraded land. These are all steps that we're taking which are very, very important in that regard. The issue of extradition cases is important. I think it has been raised on a number of occasions, and the two Prime Ministers agreed that a number of these specific issues would be discussed between our national security advisors who are going to meet in London on the 3rd of November. So they would go into detail on all of these issues that were important to the consular and security and other aspects of our relationship. And I think that is the level in which you can have the ability and capacity to go into some detail on this.
Thank you very much, sir. That brings us to the end of this special media briefing. I appreciate all your presence the late evening, and also to those who are joining us from India. Please continue to see our social media handles as well as our website for updates as we go to the last day of Prime Minister's engagements in Glasgow tomorrow. Good evening. Namaskar.